Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Vedika Maraj, and this lesson is brought to you by the Gauteng Department of Education in collaboration with Cybono Discovery Center. Today, we're going to be presenting the human nervous system together with my colleague and co-presenter, Agnes Moabelo. So we are just going to be doing the beginning part of the human nervous system, and in the following up lessons in the next 2 weeks, we'll be doing the ear and the eye. So when we think about the human nervous system, I want you to just think about what do you know or what do you think about when you think about the human nervous system? What do you think it's made up of? So the first thing that you can think of is that the first time you heard about something like this is maybe in grade 10 when you were doing tissues and you learned about the nerves. Okay, you learned that we have neurons and we have nerves, and we know that the neuron is the basic unit, right, of the nervous system. Then you can also maybe think about how everything that we do in our body is now controlled by our nervous system. And maybe you didn't know that the different parts of the nervous system, which we are going to be doing today. But let's first look at your examination guideline. You have also done this in class already, the human nervous system. So you can just apply what you already know to today's lesson. Right, so the guideline, the exam guideline, okay, we haven't spoken about this in a while, but remember that this is a very, very important document. It tells you all the information that you need to know on a specific topic and how much detail you need to go into on the subtopics in this very big topic that you may have. As you know, in grade 12, you can already see that we are moving very fast and we have many topics with lots of different concepts. Okay, so I just want to bring this to your attention so that you can see what are the different parts we're going to be doing. So I'm going to be doing the following today: the human nervous system in general. Okay, what does it entail? The central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system. And then Agnes is going to do the structure and functioning of the nerve, the simple reflex arc, and the disorders of the CNS. So every single bullet here, this gives you the indication of what you should know. Okay, so it's basically like your scope. So if you can basically tick every single one of these bullets for this topic, then you know that you have mastered this topic. And you must also be able to do lots of activities and examples and past paper questions on all these subtopics. Right, then terminology. You can't really go anywhere if you don't have the terminology first. If you can learn a few terms, I did not put all of them here. There are many terms that are in the nervous system, but I try to focus on those that are important for today's lesson. Okay, so firstly, the word stimulus. It's a detectable change in the internal or external environment. So what this means is that it is something that is changing inside your body. That will be your internal environment. And the external environment would be everything around you. Okay, so on the outside. And any change to that system is a stimulus. Then our autonomic nervous system controls our involuntary bodily functions. It is divided into the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. We then have the peripheral nervous system, which consists of nerves that extend outside the central nervous system. And the central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. So the peripheral are the nerves that extend outside of that. Then we have a neuron, which is a specialized nerve cell which transmits nerve impulses. And then we have a nerve, which are the bundle of neurons, a neurotransmitter, chemicals which carry impulses across the synapse. And homeostasis is the tendency of living organisms to maintain their internal environment constant within narrow limits, irrespective of changes in the external environment. So what that means is that, remember I told you there's an internal environment, right? And changes in that are detected those changes are called the stimulus, right? So what they're saying for homeostasis is that everything in your body, the internal environment, is supposed to be at equilibrium. Okay, it's supposed to be equal, stasis, level. and it's not dependent on what is happening in the external environment. So no matter what's happening on the external environment, your internal body needs to be contained and maintained at a certain level. Okay, but now obviously there can be changes to those levels, which you'll learn at a later point, but for now I just want you to understand what homeostasis is. Right. A lot of the other words are not going to make sense to you right now, but you will see as the course of the lesson that you will understand them much better. Okay, so now this is the actual lesson on responding to the environment. This topic is actually called responding to the environment and this one is in humans. Okay, you're also going to be doing responding to the environment in plants, but this one is the one for humans. So you can see so in general, what we need to understand is that in order to survive, all organisms must be able to respond to the environment. Okay, so the environment is going to be changing all the time and our bodies must be able to respond. We have two coordinating systems which allow them to adapt to changes in the environment and maintain their internal conditions. Okay, so we need to adapt to the changes in the environment, and then we must be able to maintain our internal environment. And the two systems that work together here are the nervous system and the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is the one that we are going to be doing after this topic, but these two work together. So your nervous system has to do with your nerves and your neurons, okay, which are going to be transmitting these impulses, and the endocrine system has got to do with hormones. So both the neurons and the hormones are like communicating devices, you could say, which communicate what must happen inside the body. Okay, so we are first looking at the nervous system today, but you'll see there'll be a little bit of endocrine that we're going to talk about as well. So what is nervous coordination? It's when all the parts of an organism work together smoothly. Okay, that's nervous coordination. Everything that, or a lot of the things that happen in our body are now controlled by our nerves. The nervous system allows humans to react to their surroundings and coordinate the response. The stimulus can come from inside or outside the body. Cells called receptors tell our bodies about changes in the environment. The signal we receive from the environment is called the stimulus. So when something happens in the environment or within the inside, outside, or the inside environment, that signal we receive is called a stimulus, right? And that stimulus is then going to be detected by receptors. Okay, and they are the ones that are going to detect all of these different changes. So the change is the stimulus. What detects the change is the receptor. Okay, very important that we understand these two words, right? Everything in the nervous system, that how nervous coordination is going to happen, is dependent on you understanding stimulus and receptors. Okay, so as you can see, there are different things over here that are giving us a stimulus. Here we have a light stimulus. Here we have, well, this can be anything, can be sight, it can be hearing. The second one, like, you know, you're seeing this this bomb. It can also be a loud sound when the bomb actually explodes. Then we've got pain over here. You can see the little boy is crying because he's felt the pain. Okay, the pain is the stimulus. There's a receptor in his knee which is going to detect that pain, but pain is the stimulus. And then we have here fire, also that's heat. And then here we have the change in temperature, right? External temperature in the environment, and so forth, right? Nervous reaction to the stimuli in the environment. Right, how does our nervous system work? So in vertebrates, they first have 5 main functions before we look at how they work. Number 1, gathers information using sense organs, transmits the information to processing areas of the brain, processing the information, formulates responses to the stimuli, and sends information back through the network of effector organs to execute the response. Okay, so in short, basically what happens is that we are going to have a stimulus. So we're going to have a change. Okay, so here we have stimulus, which is the change. It's going to be detected by the receptor, right? And then it's going to go via the neurons to the center. We don't have to understand which neuron yet. You just need to understand for now that we have a change, which is the stimulus, detected by the receptor, taken to the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. Right, taken to the brain and the spinal cord, and which is the central nervous system, and then via neurons again, the message will be, the impulse will be transmitted to the effector, right, which is going to carry out the response. And the response is going to be a response to the stimulus. Okay, so the stimulus is going to create a response. Right, so that's how it basically works. So the central nervous system, like I told you, is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. The way I like to remember it is that it's central to our bodies. You can see that, this is the center. So it's the brain and the spinal cord. And on the other side, we have the peripheral nervous system. And there you can see that it is the ones that are extending. Can you see it's extending out of the spinal cord? Right, and down, those are your peripheral nervous system. Peripheral also meaning on the sides. Okay, so central in the middle and peripheral on the sides or towards the outwards. Right, so the first part that we need to know is about the brain. Learners are so excited to learn about the brain. Okay, but in life sciences, we don't really go into a lot of detail about the brain, but I'm going to explain to you all the parts that you need to know according to the examination guideline, which are the parts that you need to know. So, firstly, we need to understand that the brain is made up of delicate nervous tissue. Okay, so you can see this is the picture actually of a real photo of a real brain. So you can see what it really looks like. So you can see it's got a whole lot of these ridges and these little, there's a specific name for them that you don't need to know what their names are, what the name is, but you can see that they've got these millions, oh, not millions, but lots of folds. Okay, and from the external structure, you can see that you can only see certain parts, right? But the important part I want you to know is that it's made up of nervous tissue which cannot repair itself. Okay, so that's the reason why when people have injuries of the brain, they really do get injured, and it's irreparable. It cannot be repaired. So that's the reason why they lose certain senses. Okay, but because it cannot repair itself and it's very delicate, it is also protected. And it's very well protected in 3 ways. Number 1, it's inside a bony cranium. Number 2, it is surrounded by 3 membranes, which are called the meninges. Okay, those are these ones that form all these folds. And it is cushioned by fluid called cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so these are the things that actually protect the brain. So from the outside, we can see the meninges, we can see this upper part, which is called the cerebrum, and then we have this structure here at the bottom, which is called the cerebellum. And when we open up, we have a cross section through the brain. These are all the other parts that you will see. So grade 12, what I want you to know is that, or you need to know how to label this diagram. You need to know where each of these structures are located in the brain, and you need to know the function of the different parts of the brain. So you need to know the location of the different parts, and you need to know the function. So you cannot just say the corpus callosum is in the brain. Okay, you need to know exactly where the location is within the brain. You must be able to know how to describe it. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go through the functions with you. Let's start number 1 with the cerebrum. Okay, that is the outer piece there that you can see. This is in charge of voluntary actions, sensations, and higher thought processes. So this is thinking. Voluntary actions like the fact that I'm moving my arm. Higher thought processes like higher cognitive thinking, and then sensations, sight, smell, hearing, okay, all of those kind of sensations, pain, those are all processed by the cerebrum. Then we have a cerebellum. Learners confuse these terms a lot because they are similar, cerebrum, cerebellum. But the cerebellum is in charge of coordination, balance, and muscle tone. Okay, so you can see this tree-like structure over here. It's a tree-like structure. That's how you can differentiate between the cerebellum. You can see this little tree, like a little tree going on with branches over there. And then we have the spinal cord. So we have the spinal cord is the area that leads, exits the brain, basically. Then that's the spinal cord. And the spinal cord runs through the vertebral column. The vertebral column is the spine, okay? So we don't call it a spine in life sciences. We are life science learners, so we call it a vertebral column. And running through that vertebral column, we have a spinal cord. Do you remember the vertebral column from grade 10? When you did the skeleton? Yes, that's the same one. So now we have a spinal cord that is running through there. Then we have the medulla oblongata. That is the small little bump. It's not this big bump over here. Just below this very big bump, we have another little, a slighter bump, which is called the medulla oblongata. Then we have the pituitary gland, right, which is a small little gland over here. And this gland is actually the one responsible for, I didn't tell you what the medulla oblongata's function is. So it is the one that is responsible for processing breathing, peristalsis. Do you remember what peristalsis is? When you swallow and then your esophagus is going to have that movement of moving the bolus down, right? You should know that from grade 11 as well. Heartbeat, swallowing, blinking, coughing, etc., all those kind of things. And they transmit the impulse from the spinal cord to the brain. And then we have the pituitary gland, which has which is actually an endocrine gland. So it's got the function of secreting hormones. Then we have the hypothalamus, which is the control center, is just above the pituitary gland. And it's the control center for hunger, thirst, sleep, body temperature, and emotions. And then we have the corpus callosum. They join the two hemispheres of the cerebrum. Okay, so the cerebrum actually has two hemispheres, and this corpus callosum over here is the one that connects or joins the two. Okay, grade 12, you must know how to label this. You need to know how to label it. You need to know how it functions. You also need to know how to apply the different functions. What do I mean by that? So you need to be able to know that if I give you a scenario like, you are reading a book, okay? So you must understand that reading a book has got to do with higher thought processes and with seeing. So that means the cerebrum is going to be processing that. So you need to know how to apply these. They're not just going to ask you, give me the function of the cerebrum. They're going to give you real life examples, and then you're going to have to explain them, okay? Right, so let's do an activity on the brain. So this is one activity of the brain. It's a very lovely picture of the brain. And now we are going to label them. The first question, most of the time, if you're going to get a diagram in life sciences, the first question is going to be labeling. Okay, give the name of the parts labeled A to C. So A, like we said, is the cerebrum. How do you know? You must recognize it by seeing all of these folds. So that's the cerebrum. And B is the corpus callosum, and C is the cerebellum, okay, because it's this tree-like structure. Please remember that if they have to say A to C, don't just see A and C and say, okay, they only want A and C. Read the question carefully. They ask for the parts labeled A to C. And the mark allocation there is 3, which is indicative to you that they want 3 parts. Give the letter and the name of the part responsible for, you see? They're asking you for the letter and the name of the part responsible for coordinating all voluntary movements. So they're giving you an example, okay? So all voluntary movements, I told you about voluntary movements? It is the cerebrum. So it's coordinating. It's because it's coordinating, right? There, you see, I fell into the trick. Right. Voluntary movements, yes, it has got to do with the cerebrum, but coordinating them, coordination of our movements is by the cerebellum. Memorizing a cell phone number, that is the cerebrum, okay, because it's about higher cognitive thinking and memory. Explain 2 parts of function E, okay, so let's go to function E. What did I tell you? It's below this bigger part, that's the medulla oblongata. So they're not asking you what it is, they're asking you to explain, give the functions. So number 1, we spoke about it. It controls breathing, peristalsis, heartbeat, and swallowing. It transmits impulses from the spinal cord to the brain, controls less important reflexes such as blinking, sneezing, vasodilation, vasoconstriction, and salivating. Okay, you might not know what all of these are yet, but vasodilation and vasoconstriction, but you will learn them later on this year. Then F, it's the hypothalamus, and it's the control center for things such as hunger, thirst, sleep, body temperature, and emotions. Okay. So this is just an easy activity to get you into things, right? Seeing as we just learned this. Provide 2 ways in which part D is protected. Okay, so let's look at part D. That's the spinal cord. How is the spinal cord protected? I already mentioned one of them to you. The spinal cord is protected by the vertebra, with cartilage discs between them to act as shock absorbers. And then they have membranes called meninges and cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so the spinal cord is also protected in that way. Which functions of the body might be affected if the lower back part of the head receives a significant impact in a car accident? So now they're saying, see, so this is what they can also give you. So they're saying the lower back part of the head receives a significant impact. So we're basically looking at this region over here. So what's going to be affected then? So it's going to be this region here that's going to be affected. The medulla oblongata will be affected. Okay, this could lead to problems with breathing, heartbeat, digestion, because that's what the medulla oblongata does, and communication between the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, so this question is actually a little bit broad. I would also say that the cerebellum would be affected, so you can even mention those things if you say that the cerebellum is affected. If you talk about the medulla oblongata being affected, then you need to mention these things. Right. There's another question on the brain. So once again, we have a diagram of the brain. Can you see this one is in a different position? It's facing a different way, but it's still the same thing. Okay, so you're still going to have the same structures. Name the 2 components of the central nervous system shown in the diagram. Okay, so which 2 can you see there? The spinal cord and the brain. Yes, it's part of the central nervous system. Identify part B, that's the corpus callosum. Part D is the cerebellum. And give the letter and name of the part that controls the voluntary actions. And here it is the cerebrum. So can you see this one? It's the cerebrum because it controls voluntary actions. In the previous question, they asked about coordination of the voluntary actions, and that's why it is the cerebellum. Right, now we look at the spinal cord. Okay, so this is what the cross-section to the spinal cord looks like. And what we have over here is that we have the white matter and we have the gray matter. In the brain, we also have this. We have the white matter and the gray matter. But here in the spinal cord, we have the gray matter lies on the inside in the shape of an H, and the white matter lies on the outside, which is opposite to what happens in the cerebrum. So in the cerebrum, we also have gray and white matter, but it's opposite to how it is positioned in the spinal cord. And the function of the spinal cord is it's the pathway for all the impulses conducted from the receptors to the brain and from the brain to the effectors. Okay, so the receptor takes the function. Remember I told you the receptors are going to conduct the impulse to the brain, right? And the spinal cord, and then from the brain and spinal cord, the impulses are going to be moved away to the effectors. And the spinal cord is also protected like the brain. It's protected by the 33 vertebrae with discs of cartilage between them, and also 3 membranes called the meninges, and lastly, the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so grade 12, what you need to know how to label the spinal cord. You need to know that this is the white matter and here's the gray matter. You need to know that there's a dorsal root and a ventral root. Then this is the spinal nerve, and here we have a central canal. Okay, so you need to know these. It's very important for when we are going to be doing the reflex arc. Okay. Right, now we go on to the peripheral nervous system. So let's just recap quickly. We looked at the central nervous system, which is made up of the brain and the spinal cord. We looked at all the different parts of the brain. We looked at how to label the brain from the outside and also on the inside. And we spoke about the spinal cord, okay? And I also mentioned to you that you need to be able to you need to know how to label the parts of the brain and also be able to provide all the functions. Right, so now we move on to the peripheral nervous system. Here we have sensory pathways and motor pathways. So in the motor pathways, I want us to basically look on this side of what we are looking at. This is what we're going to be dealing with. We have a peripheral nervous system. We have motor pathways, and the motor pathways divided into the voluntary and the involuntary system. The involuntary system is called the autonomic nervous system, and that's further divided into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. So this is what is involuntary. It's an involuntary response that occurs. Okay, so let's remind again, what did we say about what the peripheral nervous system is? It consists of the nerves that branch out from the CNS, which is the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, and connecting to other parts of the body. We have the somatic nervous system, which is conscious activities, skin and the skeletal system. The autonomic nervous system is the unconscious activities of the heart, the viscera, and glands. Oh, sorry. So that's what I explained to you. That's the somatic is the voluntary thing. So the fact that I need to move my arms, that I'm going to walk, that I'm voluntary, I'm doing these things because I am willing my body to do them. Whereas the autonomic nervous system are things that happen unconsciously. You are not telling yourself to breathe. You're not telling yourself to digest. You're not telling yourself to feel. Okay, that is what your body is doing. So when we look at this diagram over here, you will see that the brain and just showing you the brain and the spinal cord from the central nervous system. And this is showing you from the peripheral nervous system, we have cranial nerves and spinal nerves. Grade 12, you need to know this. You need to know that we have the peripheral nervous system is made up of the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. So just because cranial nerves and spinal nerves are coming from the brain and the spinal cord does not make them part of the central nervous system. This is where learners go wrong. Okay. The central nervous system is made of the brain and the spinal cord. The brain as its whole structure and the spinal cord that runs through the vertebral column. Whereas the peripheral nervous system is made up of those cranial nerves, okay, and the spinal nerves. So those are the ones that are leading away from that branch out from the CNS. Okay, I hope that is clear now. And please, we don't use PNS and CNS and ANS are not accepted abbreviations in life sciences. You need to be able to write it out in full. Peripheral nervous system, autonomic nervous system, central nervous system. Okay, then we're moving on to the autonomic nervous system. This has two parts. Okay, so before we go on to this, before I explain this, I want to actually give you a little scenario. Okay. So let's say you are on a jungle safari. Okay, well, not a jungle safari, you're on a safari, you're on a game drive maybe. Okay. And something happens that you landed up going away from your tour group, right? Or you fall out of the van or something happens, right? And now you are in this, around all these predators and all these animals that are around you. Okay, so now you are quite scared, but you're not so scared yet because you don't really see anything. But then all of a sudden, right in front of you, you see a lion. And this lion is looking straight for you, right? How do you think your body is going to respond? Firstly, what is the first thing that's going to happen? You're going to be shocked, right? Because now there's this predator, you know that it's scary, you know that your life is in danger, but there is something happening inside your body that is telling you that already, that you are in a dangerous situation. So as much as you know, then you are thinking and saying, okay, you know what, this is the lion, I'm in danger. Your body is also having a response to you being in that dangerous situation, okay? And that is when we are talking about where the autonomic nervous system is going to be stimulated to react, okay, to respond. Because the stimulus is now, there's a lion in front of you, okay? So you know now what's going to happen. What is going through your mind now when you see this? You are scared, okay? Your pupils are going to dilate, right? Your eyes are going to go bigger. Your pupils are going to dilate because you're going to need to see your surroundings clearly, because now you need to run. You need to decide, am I going to stay here and fight this lion, or am I going to run away? Okay, so your eyes are going to dilate. What else is going to happen? Your mouth goes dry, right? Your mouth goes dry. Your heart is going to start beating faster, do-do, 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 right? And these are some of the things that happen, but there are many other things that happen as well. But the whole point I want to make to you is that your autonomic nervous system has now been stimulated. And there are two divisions of this autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. But when you are in the situation of fight or flight, we call it the fight or flight response. When we are under this situation, this is called the sympathetic response, the sympathetic. Okay, so let's go through them quickly. What is happening? The pupils are going to dilate. We spoke about that. You're not going to be salivating, right? Salivation is going to be inhibited. So that means you aren't going to be making saliva. Your mouth is going to be dry. Your bronchi are going to relax. Why? So that you can be inhaling more air. Okay, your heart is going to accelerate. Why? Because we're going to need to take, okay, so firstly, your bronchi are going to relax so that more air can be taken in and more oxygen can be taken in. And then your heart rate is going to accelerate to pump that blood, that oxygenated blood around the body, because that oxygen is going to be needed by your muscles to move, to run, okay, or to fight. Your digestive system is going to be inhibited. Okay, because now is not the time to be digesting the food, the lunch that you just ate. Okay, because your body is now responding to, basically your body is reacting now to what the stimulus. Stimulate the glucose released by the liver. Yes, now your liver is going to release the glucose. Why? What is glucose needed for? Glucose is energy. It needs to provide your body now with energy and your muscles. Then we're going to have the secretion of adrenaline from the kidney. Okay, the adrenaline is a stress hormone. It's a hormone that is secreted by the adrenal gland, okay, that's above the kidney. And that is the one that is going to also stimulate all of these things to happen. We're going to have a relaxed bladder, and you're going to have a contracted rectum. Okay, and then once you're in it, now everything happened. Now you ran away. Okay, hopefully your sympathetic nervous system was now stimulated. All of these things happened. You realize, aha, there's a tree that I can run to, right? Because now your eyes are open, everything's happening. You run, and you run to that tree. You climb up the tree, and now you feel that you are safe. The lion has now lost interest, right? Now what is going to happen? Now your parasympathetic nervous system is going to be activated. And now the opposite is going to happen. Your body is coming down from that high, you could say, that adrenaline. Have you ever had an adrenaline rush? It doesn't really have to be, it can be anything. Maybe you were on a roller coaster, okay? Or maybe someone gave you a fright. That is like adrenaline rush that you can get. So now your body is coming down from this. Your pupils are going to constrict. You're going to start salivating again. Your heart is going to slow down. Your bronchi are going to constrict. Your digestive system is going to work again. And all those things, right? So basically what is happening is the opposite from the sympathetic. Okay. So basically, as we explained, it has opposite effect. One stimulates, one inhibits. Okay. So the sympathetic is the one stimulating. The parasympathetic is the one inhibiting. Okay. And then each organ is innervated by the sympathetic nerve and the parasympathetic nerve, and this is called the double innervation. So they like to ask you in the biological terms about double innervation, and then you need to speak about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Right, so here's a quick question that we are going to do. So as you can see, so this is, I gave you an example about a lion. This is a picture of a dog, a very angry dog. You can see its teeth there, very, very sharp, that's chasing this man. And this is now, they're telling us in the diagram that it's showing us a fight or flight reaction in humans. Okay, so in this one, they're running away from the dog. Name the gland that is responsible for this reaction. Okay, so the fight or flight hormone, remember I explained to you that it's adrenaline. I know that you haven't done it yet. You will do it when we do endocrine. But when you're doing this topic, it's important to mention adrenaline because it helps you understand the parasympathetic and sympathetic division. So the gland that is responsible for this reaction is the adrenal gland. And where is it found? The location of the gland, it is above the kidney or on top of the kidneys. Okay, so you cannot just say the kidney because it's on top of the kidney. I just want to remind you, this is what the kidney looks like, and this is the adrenal gland that sits above the kidney. Okay? This you should know from grade 11. And explain the effect of adrenaline on the heart and the respiratory system during the situation shown above. So what does it do to the heart and the respiratory system? Right. So now you need to think. It's now the sympathetic division. Okay. So what happens in the sympathetic? It stimulates the breathing muscles, and this increases the rate and the depth of breathing so that more oxygen is inhaled. It stimulates the heart muscle, causing an increase in the heart rate or the blood pressure so that oxygen and glucose are transported faster. Okay. So it's exactly what I explained when I did the previous picture. So grade 12, for this section, the reason why I'm spending a lot of time on it is because they like to ask this question and learners really do poorly in it. They do poorly in understanding the difference between the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and the autonomic nervous system. And I know that it's very short in many of your resources and textbooks. So please make sure that you understand these three. But for me, the key thing here is that if you understand it, you will remember it. If you can picture yourself being in that situation with a lion and what is going to happen to your body and why is it going to happen, it will help you to remember this. Because like it says here, what's it going to do to your heart and respiratory system and why? You need to start breathing in more. Why? Because you need more oxygen. So if you breathe in deeper, more air is going to go into your lungs and you're going to inhale more oxygen. Why is that needed? Because remember, we need the oxygen to be pumped around the body. The heart is going to be pumping faster so that the oxygen and the glucose can be transported. Remember, the liver is going to release the glucose, and then your glucose has to travel via your blood system to where it needs to go. Okay. So I hope that you understand that now. We're going to have a quick 5-minute break, and then my colleague and co-presenter Agnes is going to take you through to the rest of the lesson. Thank you very much.
day, grade 12 learners. Welcome back to our second session of the nervous system. And thank you very much, Vedika, for the beautiful lesson that you have just presented. I'm going to start with the nerves. And on a lighter note, what I love about our subject life sciences, you dealing and studying with the entire body. You have studied the reproductive system, you have studied the respiratory system, we've got many systems. Now we are doing the nervous system, and all the systems work together. If one stops, you might even collapse. So I'm going to take you through the nerves. So we need to understand what are nerves. So the entire body is made up of nerves, and it has been proven that each nerve consists of millions of neurons. So what is a nerve? Nerves carry impulses. Vedika earlier on mentioned what? The signals. Those are impulses. So nerves carry signals, nerves carry impulses to and from all body parts, right? So nerves send and carry impulses to and from all parts of the body. And nerves are made up of neurons. Hence, I've mentioned that each nerve carries, or each nerve is made up of millions, many of those neurons. Now, the nerves are made up of the fibers, right? And those fibers are joined together, or those fibers are connected together by what? By connective tissue. If you can look at the structure, this is the structure of the nerve, how it looks like. And because we say it is made up of many neurons, then here we have neurons, right? So nerves are made up of the neurons. So you may ask yourself, what are the neurons? Remember, we looked at the nerves. Now, in terms of the neurons, they are specialized cells. They are so special. Specialized cells which connect the brain and the spinal cord. Remember, in the first session, we thoroughly looked at those parts of the brain and also the importance of the brain and the spinal cord. They are delicate, they are covered by, they are surrounded, covered by protective meninges, all right? Those layers that we call meninges. So neurons are specialized cells which connect the brain and the spinal cord to all parts of the body. So the brain and the spinal cord are the engine of the body. Imagine if you broke your spinal cord. Don't forget that the spinal cord runs along those vertebrae column. So if it happens that you get injured on your spinal cord, what will happen? Do you think you will walk? That is a big problem. So neurons are specialized cells which connect the brain and spinal cord to all other parts of the body. So we're going to look at parts that forms the neuron. So the neuron is made up of what? The cell body, the dendrites, and the axon. So basically, what will help you to differentiate between types of neurons that we'll be looking at, you are going to be looking at what? Cell body. You should be able to identify the dendrites. You should be able to identify the axon. Okay? Now, the dendrites. Remember, a neuron is made up of those three parts. Now, the dendrites always carry the impulse to the cell body. Now, I'm going to give you an example here. This is a neuron. You will know the type of a neuron later on. Now, what we are saying, these are dendrites. All of this, they are dendrites. Now, dendrites always carry impulse to the cell body. This is the cell body. Inside, it has got a nucleus. Dendrites carry impulses to the cell body. then what will happen to those impulses in the cell body? We've got this long structure here. We call it the axon. Now, the axon carry impulses away from the cell body. So we're looking at movement or the direction of flow of the impulse right now, right? So axon always carry impulse away from the cell body. So what is the function of the cell body? Remember, all neurons are made up of what? The cell body, the dendrites, and the axon. So the cell body controls metabolism of the cell. So basically, your whole body, all those important parts, all those systems, all those activities that are done are controlled in your body so that you function. You are listening now. Something is assisting you, the brain, right? You're watching, you do many activities. You're writing, you are able to write, you are able to study on your own. It's because of the systems that we have. Right. Now, each neuron is made up of a cell body, dendrite, and axon. Now, this is an example of the axon. Remember, these are the dendrites, right? And then this blue one, the long structure here. I don't know if you see the blue one, but on my side is blue. But whatever the color that you see, that runs along this pink one, right? So this is the axon. Now the axon is wrapped around by the myelin sheath. So I made it pink so that you can differentiate between the two structures. So if you can look at my axon here, that is blue, runs along this myelin sheath. Can you see this? It is coming in, is coming in, is coming in. Right. What is the importance? What is the function of the myelin sheath in this case? It insulates. What is the function of myelin sheath in this case? It speeds up the flow of impulses. So all the time, this axon and the dendrites need to be wrapped around, need to be covered with a fatty layer, right? So axon and dendrites have myelin sheath, and what is a myelin sheath? Is a fatty layer. Hence, it helps in the insulation. It acts as insulation. It speeds up the transmission of impulses. Remember, later on you will learn how the impulses are transmitted, looking at the direction. Okay? There are 3 types of neuron. The first one is motor neuron. Then we've got sensory neuron. We've got the interneuron. So we'll be looking at the functions as we'll dealt with all the parts. In each section or in each topic, you need to know the structures there. So what is important, again, you need to know the structures. You need to give the functions. Drawing and labeling is key, and you need to be able to give the functions. Now, this is the motor neuron. Now, how are you going to differentiate between the 3 that I've just mentioned? So the advice that I would like to give you is that you look at the positioning of the cell body. You look at the positioning of the cell body. So this is the motor neuron. Now, if you look at this motor neuron, this is the cell body. The cell body is towards the end of the neuron. Then these are the dendrites. Remember when we started, we said the dendrites carry impulses to the cell body. Then the axon carry impulses away from the cell body. So motor neuron is the efferent neuron. Relate the efferent to the motor. So motor neuron is the efferent neuron. What is the function of the motor neuron? It transmits impulse from central nervous system to the effectors. So it's also important to understand the scientific terms that we're using for each topic. Now we've got the effectors. In our first session, we mentioned the receptors. Now we've got effectors. So you need to be able to differentiate so that you understand the functions. So the motor neuron transmit the impulse from central nervous system to the effectors. The effectors, we can talk about the muscles, we can talk about the glands. So the effectors bring about a response. So in every action that can take place, response. At a later stage, you need to respond. I can ask you a question, you must respond. I can get hurt, I must respond. So anyone does not, there's no one that likes pain. So let's say I clap you on one side. Are you just going to stare at me and look at me? You are going to feel pain and you are going to react. You are going to respond. Okay, fine. We are not there yet. So the effectors bring about a response. So this is the motor neuron. This is the position of the cell body there. And then we've got the myelin sheath that wraps, that covers the axon. And then we've got terminal ends of the axon. So you should be able to label all the parts there. Remember, we also have got a cytoplasm, and then we've got a nucleus in there, right? Next is the sensory neuron. Now, with the sensory neuron, again, check the position of the cell body. The cell body is nearly in the middle, nearly in the middle. Can you see that? Because here is the axon this side, we've got the axon this other side. Unlike the motor neuron, it was nearly at the end, at the terminal, right? So these are the receptor cells. Remember, the sensory neuron are the ones that are going to have those, they are going to detect the change in the stimulus. So we've got receptor cells here. We've got the axon covered by a myelin sheath. We've got the cell body here. You need to know what is within the cell body. We've got the cytoplasm within the body. And then we also have got the nucleus there. Then we've got the terminal ends. So the sensory neuron is the afferent neuron. Motor neuron is the efferent neuron, right? And then what is the function of the sensory neuron? It transmits impulses from the sense organs or receptors to the central nervous system, whereas the motor neuron transmits impulses away from the central nervous system to the effector muscles. So the sensory neuron, it's sensitive to stimuli in the stimuli in the environment. Remember, if there is change in the environment, the stimuli is going to be converted into what? Into an impulse. The next type of the neuron, we have the interneuron. Now, with the interneuron, what is its function? So we find the interneuron in the brain and also in the spinal cord. What will be the purpose, right? So the interneuron is found in the brain and also in the spinal cord. The interneuron receives impulses from sense organs. Then it connects the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. In fact, the three works together. Remember, the sensory neuron detects the change in the environment, detect the stimulus, then the impulses are going to be transmitted to the brain, right? Now, in the central nervous system, that's where the sensory neuron is going to be connected to the interneuron. So the interneuron connects the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. And by the way, where it connects, they actually do not touch one another. So there's a space between the interneuron and the sensory neuron. There's a space between. I will show you that one. Okay. So it is found in the brain and the spinal cord. It receives impulse from sense organs, then connects the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. So the interneuron is there to connect the two, the sensory neuron and the motor neuron. It connects. I'm going to give you one activity. Remember, you need to understand how the body functions, right? With this activity, in all the activities that you get, in all the question papers, you first read you first study the diagram that is given. In this case, before you can even attempt those answers, those questions, you need to label for yourself to say, oh, this is A. We've just done the A. This, we know they are dendrites. Okay, ask yourself those questions. What could be B? B, because it runs here. It should be the axon. Okay, then C. Oh, it protects the axon. So it means this is the myelin sheath, right? Let's get to the questions quickly. Identify the type of neuron represented in the diagram. Remember, in identifying, the one that is going to help you most is to identify the position of the cell body. So identify the type of the neuron represented in this diagram. It is the motor neuron or the efferent neuron. For 1 mark, state one function of part B. So for you to know the function, you need to label that part. So B, what is B? State one function of part B. This is part B. Now, because you know what is that part B, or you can label that part B. Now the function of B, which is the axon, is to transmit impulse away from the cell body, and then it transmits impulse to effectors. All right? But when we talk about the sensory, that senses the change in the environment. Then we will talk about what? Right? Receptors. So those are two terms which likely confuse some of the candidates. But you need to relate the effectors to the motor, the receptors to the sensory, because sensory, it is the one that senses the change in the external environment, right? And then explain the role of part C in the functioning of the neuron. That's the next question. Where is part C? Yes, you know part C is myelin sheath. Now you need to explain the role of the myelin sheath in the functioning of the neuron so that the neuron can function. Remember, for the whole entire neuron to function, all these parts needs to be there. We need to see the dendrites, the cell body, the axon, the myelin sheath, the terminal, and you need to see all those parts. If there's one part that is damaged, something will happen, right? So C, which is the myelin sheath, remember we are explaining the role now. It causes it to conduct impulse faster. Why faster? It prevents short circuit and it insulates the neuron. So since it's insulated, obviously the movement there will be faster. So it conducts impulses faster. So imagine if this myelin sheath is broken. Do you think impulses will be conducted faster? No. So all the time, the axon should be wrapped around by the myelin sheath. Next point, we are looking at reflex action and reflex arc. So you should be able to differentiate between the two, because should you confuse those two, you'll be losing marks there. Reflex action, reflex arc. Definitely with reflex action, that's where you need to respond. How do you respond? You can, like I gave an example, you can't just walk on a broken glass with your bare feet, right? Keep on walking. You'll see what will happen. So don't try that at home, but you need to respond by acting. How do you act? You will jump and remove your feet from stepping on the broken glasses, isn't it? Right? So with the reflex action, with the reflex arc, relate the arc to a pathway. Now let's look at the differences between the reflex action and the reflex arc. So a reflex action, this is a definition that you need to know as well, according to exam guideline. So a reflex action is a quick, automatic response to stimulus. Quick is automatic. It's not intentional. You don't plan to do that. So it's a quick, automatic response to stimulus. For an example, we have few examples here that we can relate to a reflex action. The knee jerk, for an example. Sometimes you don't do it by the will, okay? Sneezing. Can you force yourself now to sneeze? No, it happens automatical, right? Quickly removing a body part away from danger to respond to pain. If you are being stepped on, okay, let me not use that example. If you put your fingers on a burning surface, on fire, what will happen? Because the receptors are going to detect the change in the environment to say, no, this is hot. What is going to happen? You're going to show that quick action. You remove faster. Imagine if your hand is burning and you're removing it slowly. You will burn. So the action happens very fast and it's automatic. Okay? So basically, you'll be quickly removing a body away from danger to respond to pain. Once you feel that pain, you're going to respond differently. Coming to the reflex arc, remember this is reflex action. Now with reflex arc, girls and boys, it is a pathway along which an impulse is transmitted to bring about a response to a stimulus during reflex action. Right? So the nervous impulse goes to the spinal cord, then an impulse passes from the spinal cord directly to the effector to give an immediate response. Now, in your exams, they can give you different scenarios. So with those different scenarios, they are different, yes, but then the pathway is the same. You need to talk about those specific concepts that should be there. So in your response, you should not be generic, but use the pathway that I will show you in our next slides. So the nervous impulse goes to the spinal cord, then an impulse passes from the spinal cord where directly to the effector to give immediate response. Now this is a note here. Yes, with our life sciences, you need to talk about correct terms relevant to the topic. Right now, I'm talking about the transmission of impulse. What is an impulse? Remember, we spoke about the detection of the change in the external environment. the stimulus is converted to an impulse. Now, this is a note to remind you to say don't use general terms. Talk about an impulse and never a message. Don't talk about messages transmitted to this area, this part. That is an impulse. Also, you need to know the significance of reflex action. Remember, we spoke about reflex action as a quick automatic response to stimulus. Is it important? Yes. Because without it, the body can get damaged, right? So, the significance of reflex action, the importance of reflex action. Reflex action is necessary for what? It allows for quick response without thinking about it. You don't need to think about the danger, girls and boys. If you feel you are not in a safe environment, you get hurt by an object, you quickly decide without even thinking, without even deciding, you act, you respond to that kind of a pain. So the importance of reflex action, it allows for quick response without thinking about it to prevent damage to the body. Because if you don't respond to that certain environment, any part of the body that is affected at that time will get damaged. You'll be hospitalized. Let's look at the pathway. How does it happen? Remember, when we started with the first session, we spoke about the peripheral nervous system, the central nervous system. We talk about the nerves there. We talk about the brain. We talk about the spinal cord. Right? So with the reflex act, any scenario can be given, like I've mentioned earlier on, but I'm going to show you the important pathway that needs to be related to whatever scenario that might be given in the exam. All right. So this is a hot surface, a hot plate here. Then you are going to experience change in the environment. And what detects the change in the environment in this case is your sensory receptors, and that is the skin. In this case, it will be the skin. Remember, you are using your finger to touch that hot surface. Then what is going to happen? The stimulus is going to be converted to an impulse, right? Stimulus is converted to an impulse. Then what is going to happen? Impulse are going to be transmitted, carried to through the afferent pathway. Remember, you are relating the sensory neuron to the afferent neuron. So what is going to happen? The sensory neuron is going to sense the change in the environment. In this case, your skin will detect that change in the environment. Then what is going to happen? We're going to have transmission of impulses through or via the afferent pathway, using the afferent pathway to the dorsal root. Through the dorsal root. So with the sensory neuron, remember, it carries impulses via the afferent pathway to the dorsal. That is very, very important, root. Then in the brain, what is going to happen? Remember, we've got the sensory neuron. I've mentioned earlier on that the interneuron is found in the brain. So what is going to happen? The interneuron is going to connect the sensory neuron. Then in there, an impulse is going to be carried to the brain. And then in the brain, it registers pain. I hope this makes sense. You touch the hot surface, impulses, okay, stimulus is converted to impulses, then impulses travel or are carried or are transmitted through the dorsal root into the brain, where the brain registers pain. You don't just feel pain immediately, but this happens very, very fast, like a twinkle of an eye. It happens very fast. Then in the brain, like we say, the impulse is carried to the brain where it is registered as pain. Then the interneuron, that's where it's going to connect the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. Then the impulses are going to be transmitted through the ventral root. Remember, to the central nervous system, impulses travel through the dorsal root. But away from the central nervous system, impulses are transmitted through the ventral root. You need to mention these ones regardless of the scenario to understand, to show the examiner that you understand what is a reflex arc. Then those impulses are transmitted to the, okay, this was your hand. Remember, in your arm, you have those muscles. So the motor neuron transmit impulses from the central nervous system, that is the brain, the spinal cord, to the effector muscles. Now look at the muscles here. We've got your triceps, you've got your biceps. Remember, your finger is on fire or your hand is on fire, right? So the triceps are going to relax and the biceps are going to contract. Then what is going to happen? Because we said impulses are transmitted to the effector muscles. These are the muscles. We're talking about the triceps, the biceps. Then immediately you're going to withdraw the arm from the hot surface. That's how you respond. So if you don't respond, if you don't remove that hand, you will burn. The body part will be damaged. So imagine if you leave that body there, that hand there on the hot surface. What do you think will happen? Okay, let's move on. So look at the response. For reflex action to happen, whatever the scenario is, look at this one. The person removed the hand, withdraws the hand or the person had withdrawn the hand very, very fast so that the hand does not get damaged. That's the pathway. Okay. Now, this is an activity to address, or is a different scenario. That one, it was your hand on fire, on a hot substance, on a hot surface, I'm sorry. So this activity is a different scenario here. You quickly look at what is given so that you don't generalize. You talk about what you see there. You can let's quickly label. So this is cerebrum. Okay. Cerebrum, you quickly label. And this one, cerebellum. Like Vedika mentioned that, don't confuse the two. Then this is medulla oblongata. All right. These are the muscles. What will happen if I use a hammer to hit on your knee? What will happen? Just think. I hit your knee with a hammer. What is going to happen? You use the same procedure, or you use the same pathway, the reflex arc pathway, to explain. Okay, look at the question. Identify parts 1 to 5. We have already identified those. What will be the effect of the body if part 5 is damaged? Remember, part 5 is cerebellum. So if it is damaged, what do you think will happen? Remember, Vedika did the functions of those parts of the brain. Balancing, for an example. Cerebellum is responsible for balancing. This is one of the functions, but we did many functions there. Describe the reflex action shown in the diagram. Remember, someone hits your knee with a hammer, what will happen? Let's look at the solutions there. We have already labeled. Let's move on. What will be the effect of the body if part 5 is damaged? Lack of muscle control. You can't control those muscles. Lack of coordination. That is the cerebellum. Bad posture and upset equilibrium. Any one of those. Remember, we are describing there reflex action. Describe the reflex action. What will you do? How are you going to respond if you are hit by a hammer on your knee? Right? So, like I was saying, the scenarios will differ. But in this case, what will happen? The hammer strikes the knee. Stimulus is converted into impulse, transmitting along sensory neuron to the dorsal horn. Remember, we spoke about this one, where sensory neuron makes a synapse with an interneuron. An impulse moves along the interneuron to the motor neuron via what? Via the synapse to the effector muscle. So you can relate with the first example that we did, which reacts and the leg is raised upward to prevent yourself from pain. What is a synapse? So a synapse is a point where the impulse passes from terminal branch of the axon of the neuron to the dendrite of the next neuron. What is also important with the point of synapse, the neurons never touch each other. They do not touch each other. The gap between the neurons is called synaptic gap. So in that space where it connects the two, remember they do not touch. There's a space. In that space, we've got chemical neurotransmitters that will help to transmit the impulse from one neuron to the other or to the next across the synaptic gap. The importance of synapse. Remember, it is a gap that is between the neurons. So is it important, or are we looking at the importance of the synapse? Significance of synapse? It ensures that impulse travel on one direction. Obviously, it creates order there. At the synapse, a nerve impulse can either be speeded up or slowed down or blocked. So once it is blocked, something will happen. Therefore, it enables unnecessary or unimportant background stimuli to be filtered out. So the synapse channels impulses so that reactions are integrated and become part of learning and memory. So you can look at these neurons. This is a gap, space in between the two. We've got transmitters here that helps to transmit impulses from one neuron to the other. Now, diseases of the central nervous system. Girls and boys, you might be asked about one of those diseases. So we've got Alzheimer's disease as one example of the diseases of the nervous system. Now, with Alzheimer's, what is it? Here is an indicator. Okay, I'm showing you now the difference between a person with a brain that is affected and the person with a brain that might not be affected. So healthy brain will be having there the cortex. Can you see the cortex of the brain? Will be having those neurons will be there. Point of synapse will be there to show that connection, right? Then, but severe Alzheimer's, if someone has got Alzheimer's, probably the cortex is damaged, the neurons are damaged. So what will happen? Let's check. It is the most common form of dementia. What is dementia? I know you heard about this word many times. It is a general term used for memory loss. It is a general term used for memory loss or other intellectual abilities. So that can be caused by what? Severe Alzheimer's. So it affects most people above 65 years of age. So you are still safe, but it can happen or it can develop earlier in the stages of life. So how do we characterize Alzheimer's disease? It is characterized by loss of neurons, like we have seen here, loss of neurons, and synapse, loss of synapse in the cortex of the brain, as well as the presence of, we can see the clumps there of proteins and tangled bundles of fibers. So what is the cause of the Alzheimer's disease? The cause is unknown. Causes are unknown. Now, looking at the next points, the symptoms. How do we see the symptoms, whether someone has got Alzheimer's disease or not? Slower thinking, behavioral changes, confusion of events, a day is a night, confusion of events, time, place, difficulty recognizing people they know. Imagine all of a sudden your close friend does not know you. Who are you? They're asking, who are you? Memory loss, difficulty in speaking, swallowing, and also walking. Cure, there's no cure for Alzheimer's disease. However, researchers are still trying to get a better way of treating the disease. Okay? And then next one is multiple sclerosis. Right. Now with that one, with the multiple sclerosis, remember the brain will be having cortex, the brain will be having the neurons, right? So this is the axon, this is the myelin sheath. This is a normal neuron. But then what happens if myelin sheath breaks into pieces? It's scarier. So it is a progressive degenerative disorder of the central nervous system. It includes the brain optic nerve as well as the spinal cord. So multiple sclerosis is commonly diagnosed between the ages of 20 and 40. 20 and 40. You are still outside the bracket, okay? And affects more women than men. Multiple sclerosis means many scars. Think of the brain. Many scars resulting in damage of the myelin sheath. Like I've indicated, you here to say the normal, here is the normal myelin sheath, but this one is broken into pieces. It scatters patches of demyelination on the neurons, and it makes it impossible for impulses to move across the areas. So if we've got the axon covered with myelin sheath, obviously the impulses are going to move in an appropriate way. But if the myelin sheath is broken, so it's going to be impossible for impulses to be carried through from one place to other parts of the body. Diseases of the multiple sclerosis symptoms: movement, feeling, and coordination and balance, vision, tingling of numbness, fatigue, bladder bowel problems. Those are the symptoms. Pain, concentration of and memory loss, mood swings. They are the symptoms. You can check yourself, or you can check the adults that you're staying with. Cure, there's no cure for multiple sclerosis. Management, however, you can manage that by living a healthy lifestyle. What is a healthy lifestyle? Maybe eat a balanced diet, exercise, right? Even with this one, There's no cure. However, stem cell research and biologically engineered production of interferons slow down the progress of the disease. Stem cell research. Okay. Then, last activity quickly. The diagram below represents a reflex arc. You quickly label. Then 231. What is a reflex arc? By now, we all know what is a reflex arc. Is a pathway along which the nerve impulse are carried from receptors to an effector to bring about reflex action. Okay? Explain the effect of the reflex action when C is removed. What is C? If C is removed, neuron C is removed. So you should be able to identify this neuron C. Explain the effect of the reflex action when neuron C is damaged. So a person would be able to feel, but won't be able to feel the sensation. Hence, they will get hurt. Name the disorder that is the result in the breakdown of myelin sheath. We have just looked at that one, the disorder. The disorder is multiple sclerosis. Okay? Now, this is just caution to say, as you'll be sitting for exams, be able to differentiate between reflex action and reflex arc. You must know that reflex action is a rapid, involuntary action in response to stimulus. This is in your exam guideline. Also, be careful of spelling, because once your spelling is incorrect, you're going to lose marks. For an example, when you talk about nervous, when the question refers to peripheral nervous system, do not confuse that to autonomous or autonomic nervous system. In other words, you should know the difference between peripheral nervous system and autonomic nervous system. And then you also need to use correct biological terms, the receptors, the effectors, be able to use correct terms related to the questions that are asked. So you need to read your questions very, very carefully. Also, in summary, to summarize the nervous system, there's a need for nervous system in humans. Yes, the body needs that. That's the first thing that you need to know. We need to have the nervous system. You need to know the brain, the spinal cord. You need to know that the brain and the spinal cord are protected by those layers, are protected by the meninges. You need to know the location and functions of parts of the brain, as we did in the first session. You need to know the peripheral system and the autonomic system and the functions of sensory neuron and motor neuron. You also need to be able to define reflex action, reflex arc, describe reflex arc. You need to know the structure of reflex arc, the functions of the part using the diagram, receptors. You need to, so in all of this that I'm mentioning, we need to see that pattern, the system. Don't muddle up the information. Talk about the sensory following that correct pathway. You need to know causes and symptoms of the disorders of the nervous system. For today, we learned about Alzheimer's disease and multiple sclerosis, okay? And then you need to know the importance, the significance of reflex action, as well as the significance of synapse. Right? For practice, prelim is just around the corner. End of the year is just around the corner. So you need to practice past papers. So for today, these are the papers that you need to go back and look at it. The November paper, 2023, 2024, practice using various kinds of exam papers from other provinces as well, but you are given latitude to refer back to those question papers for practice. Okay, girls and boys, we have come to the end of our session. We are going to meet again, or the next lesson will be on the 15th of May 2025. Do not forget, times are still the same. Join or log on to your Pocket School at 2:30 to 4 o'clock. And the next topic that we'll be doing on that day is the eye. Goodbye and study hard. Thank you.